Hi there. This is my action research plan at Brock University for the class Teaching, Research, and Educational Inquiry by Rita Carpino. We're going to take a look at my statement of action research problem. So my focus here is on trying to eliminate the time it takes to transition on an everyday basis. And my reason for looking at transition specifically is based on past experiences in all three practicum blocks. So since finishing the last teaching block, I have learned all about the kind of teacher I want to be and the kind of classroom I would want my students to be exposed to. There are a few things I've realized that are part of my core values. I previously submitted my core values into the form on the Sakai site for Brock as these: wanting to improve the time it takes for students to come into the classroom and take out the materials they need, wanting to improve students' organizational skills and help them set reminders to be prepared for class, and wanting to learn more about strategies to teach the students to assist them with making them more responsible for their homework and desk area. Now, these were the first core values that came to mind, but as I continued on, I learned that these weren't my number one core values that need to be accomplished within a school year or just even as a teacher. And so I've updated my core values to reflect three other things that I think are the most important to have as a teacher to uphold within your classroom. And these are on the next slide. So we're going to take a look at my updated core values. Not to say that those core values that I mentioned previously aren't important. Those are okay to accomplish within a school year setting, but they're secondary to these values that I think are the most important. So those values are respect, responsibility, and positivity. So a classroom can only be successful if you keep on working at it in all aspects. Just as an IEP is constantly being worked on and updated, the life within a classroom should be treated as such. In order to set up our students for success, we need to model respect, responsibility, and positivity on a daily basis. These are three values that I want to maintain in my future classroom. After all, positive student achievement and student well-being are the most important things that we as teachers attempt to keep strong and thriving. This in turn leads into my topic for research. So the area of interest for my project stems from my experiences with transitioning in each practicum block. So in all the grades that I have taught in a grade 3 class, a grade 4 class, and a grade 2-3 class, I've experienced some difficulty with transitions, whether I was at fault for taking too long on a lesson, or just the students taking long in general to get prepared for the next activity. In all my placements, I witnessed on a daily basis ultimately the same individuals who were not completing homework. They're constantly asking to go to their locker to look for their work or asking to be excused to go to the bathroom, or just that they can't find their homework in their desk area, which caused a lot of wasted time. Not only was it disruptive for myself, but for the other students who were prepared and ready to learn. When trying to decide what my core values were, I reflected upon those experiences and how much time was wasted due to those several minor disruptions. I have realized that there will most likely always be some issues with transitioning. At the end of the day, there will be some time wasted in some way or another. Ultimately, the goal here would be to increase the learning and decrease the amount of time that is being wasted. But I'll have more to say in terms of what we find out about transitions later on. So this in turn leads to my research question. So the issues I have experienced have turned into this potential research question that I really thought would be important to look into. How will implementing in and out of classroom strategies help to reduce transition times among elementary age students? This question was developed before going into the most recent teaching block. Now that that block is finished, this question has made me realize that some strategies may ease transitions in some ways, but ultimately I've realized things come up unexpectedly and daily routines can be changed. Sometimes transitions just take longer than expected. I find that it all comes down to the group of students that you have for the year and how they are feeling that day. As a teacher, or as teachers, we could have great classroom management skills, but there will just be days that we have that are on and off. Some days will be good, some days may be bad. As teachers, we use those experiences and we learn from it, and by taking and reflecting and evaluating those circumstances, we're able to grow as educators. Next, we're going to take a look at some definitions that will appear in some of my literature review sources. So we're going to get into those terms in case you're not familiar with them. So we're going to take a look at what is called buddy bands. It's a system implemented where several or even all of the children are leaving the classroom, they go somewhere else. And when they do so, they use a tool called a buddy band. So it can be beneficial for students to be in pairs while walking. And it could just be anything that two children can hold as a pair without touching hands. So essentially, it could be like a toy or an instrument where one student holds one end and the other student holds the other end, and it's just a linking tool so that students can be walking in two single file lines, and it just makes transitioning so much easier. The next definition that, if you're not familiar with, is classroom management, and it refers to the wide variety of skills and techniques that teachers used to keep students organized, orderly, focused, attentive, on task, and academically productive during a class. So essentially, we as teachers need to have good classroom management skills to ensure that students are learning to the best of their ability, and things like transitioning and behavioral things don't get in the way. The next definition is transition buddy. So it's a buddy system such as pairing a child who needs help transitioning with an encouraging, supportive classmate. And the last definition here is transition time. So it's a change or a passage from one stage or state to another. So essentially, transitioning takes place in two ways. You're transitioning in the classroom between activity to the next activity, or you're transitioning between classroom to classroom where the teacher does change. Next, we're going to get into my preliminary literature review source. I found 4 different articles all talking about transitioning and different strategies that were implemented. So the first literature review is entitled Taking the Time Out of Transitions by Carolyn Gardino and Elizabeth Kirby Fullerton. So in this article, it reports the 5 most common off-task activities that account for the most lost time in school. And those were transitioning, socializing, disciplining, daydreaming, and time spent out of the classroom. So here, classroom management is highlighted as an important feature to maintain. So the main focus of this article is answering this question: how does a teacher of an inclusive class ensure that all students arrive at each new activity with necessary supplies and an attitude to attend quickly to the task? So specifically, they reported that transitioning and daydreaming accounted for the greatest loss in academic time. The next article is called Using Daily Transition Strategies to Support All Children by Peggy Thielen and Tammy Cliffman. So this second article talked about daily transition strategies that were implemented in early childhood classrooms. Though my focus isn't specifically on early childhood classrooms or younger children only, I believe that strategies can be modified to reflect age and ability of students all the way from kindergarten to grade 8. This article stated that well-planned transitions can be a positive learning experience for children, and that many of the strategies could be adapted for use in other settings. So some of the strategies that were indicated to ease transitions in the in-class were activity schedules, individual visual schedules, visual prompts, behavioral visual supports, timers, simple auditory signals. This was relevant to my last practicum block because I would write out a schedule on the board so my students knew when the next activity would be. So if I was too caught up into my lesson and was not aware of the time, my students would catch on quick and remind me that it was time for something else. So that's a good thing about students, is that they do respond to visual schedules. The article also mentions some of the out-of-classroom strategies that could be implemented to ease transitions. They were lining up, transition buddies, and buddy bands. In the second block, a school-wide strategy was used in order for all students to enter the classroom at the same time. After each recess, rather than all students rushing into the class at different times and socializing, all students would line up against the wall of the classroom. And my associate would give them their instructions when all the students were in line. He would tell them what subject it was and what books and materials were needed for the lesson. As soon as he was done talking, he would send them in, and then students would take out what they needed and they would be able to get started right away. And I really enjoyed that strategy as I continued to use it on throughout the block. I was not able to implement that transition strategy in the third block, nor was I able to implement transition buddies or buddy bands. I think it would be beneficial for early primary classes as opposed to junior or intermediate grades. The next article we're going to talk about is called Decreasing Transition Times in Elementary School Using Computer-Assisted Instruction to Automate Intervention Components. So this article talked about an incentive program that rewards students for transitioning well. So they did an experiment within a grade 6 classroom, and they used a game called the Timely Transition Game. So here the teacher used a stopwatch to to time the transitions and told the class the amount of time spent in each transition so they were aware of it. And the teacher then wrote the time on the board and randomly selected a card from a box of cards labeled with specific times. If all students had transitioned before the selected amount of time elapsed, then that class would earn a token toward a class-wide reward. So essentially, incentive programs were of main importance in this article. So they, in my opinion, they can be useful some of the time. However, they do get tricky in some cases. So you don't always want to reward students for doing the behavior they should be doing in the first place. So the article's main focus was on identifying students within a classroom that have more difficulty with transitions than others. So those students were then chosen as participants that would be observed during center-based activities and documented according to how long it would take to transition between those activities. So this was done using computer-assisted technology. The issue that I have with that is that the research it would take to do something like this would take a long time, in my opinion, and so I don't think that's really feasible. Though it would be a great way to get results and have documented data, the problem lies within decreasing transition times for all students. The next article is supporting classroom transitions between daily routines, so strategies and tips. So in this article, a classroom preschool teacher is explaining the reality of teaching and that transitions are difficult for children because it's a change of routine. The article listed some supports to help facilitate classroom transitions, and they were reducing waiting times between activities that children may encounter, having quiet activities before the activities, and considering the impact these will have on the transition, allowing children to move freely between activities by providing structure for closure, keeping task expectations small, and reducing transitions where all children have to do things together. Next, we're going to get into my action plan. So coming up, we're going to learn about different data sources and ways of collecting data that I would do for this research. So the data sources that I have chosen to use would be anecdotal records, surveys, and interviews. Why would I use anecdotal records? Because of the convenience. I think they're the most meaningful type of data source. And you can obtain a substantial amount of information in a limited time. I would do it on a weekly basis by just observing the different strategies that were implemented into my classroom to see if they were successful in reducing transition times. Why would I want to use surveys? Through surveying students, I will be able to generate data on why it takes too long to transition. So I would do this in 3 phases before actually carrying out my research, then during my research, and then after. And how would I do it? I can put the data from the surveys that I do end up collecting into a graph and chart so I can compare overall across different classes. I can even take age and grade into consideration to see if there is a correlation between the amounts of time is wasted transitioning across the different divisions and grades. And for interviews, why I would want to use that, because I can do one-on-one interviews with different teachers or even the principal. Just to get a feel for different strategies that they may have used in their classrooms that are successful in reducing transition times. I would hold interviews for about 20 to 30 minutes in order to find out different strategies that I can implement, and I would record the participants in the interview as long as their permission is granted. The participants that I would use would be students, teachers, and the principal. With researching, you need to have reliable sources in order to gain valid data. So my number one thing is that you need to be honest and truthful about your issues as a classroom teacher. My issue was my struggles with transition times. And so making your struggles apparent in order for help to be administered is a great start when researching. Honesty does equal growth. And when you're honest about your issues, you have a valid reason to carry out research. Nobody's perfect. In terms of data collection procedures, data will be collected from the beginning of the school year, around the end of September, beginning of October, as long as routines have been established. Anecdotal notes can be an ongoing process. Survey questions can be done at those 3 reporting periods. And interviews can be held when strategies that were implemented are not successful. Some ethical considerations. You need to think about the confidentiality of your participants. You're not going to disclose any names or use them without their consent. And you're not going to record participants in the interview unless you have their permission. Overall, I hope this research project motivates you into looking at strategies to implement into your classroom on how to reduce transition times. Thank you for watching. That is the end of my presentation. Bye for now.